Here he is, friends. He got his suit back just in time. And no matter what happens in his life, he gets absolutely no respect.
For 30 years, Johny Carson was the undisputed king of late night. Behind that Midwestern charm was a man who ran his show with absolute authority. Cross him and you were done. Here are 10 times Johny Carson had zero tolerance for disrespect. Number 10. Dick Shawn and the Canoe Incident. Dick Shawn was one of those comedians who lived on the edge. He'd appeared on The Tonight Show dozens of times since 1964, always bringing that unpredictable energy that made audiences lean forward in their seats. Shawn was the kind of performer who never quite fit into any box. Too wild for mainstream television, too theatrical for stand-up clubs, but absolutely electric when the mood struck him right. On May 6, 1974, Rich Little was guest hosting The Tonight Show, and Dick Shawn was one of the guests. After his stand-up routine, something came over him. Maybe it was the energy in the room. Maybe it was just Shawn being Shawn. He walked over to Johny Carson's sacred desk, that desk that had become as iconic as the host himself, and tipped it over. Then he climbed into it and started paddling, pretending the overturned desk was a canoe. Rich Little and guest Della Reese joined in the improvisation, playing along with the absurdist bit. The studio audience loved it. It was spontaneous, weird, classic Dick Shawn. But Johny Carson wasn't there to see it, and when word got back to him about what had happened to his desk, to his set, to the carefully controlled environment he'd spent years perfecting, he wasn't amused. That desk wasn't just furniture. It was part of the Tonight Show brand, instantly recognizable to millions of Americans, and someone had turned it into a prop for an unscripted comedy bit. For the next 11 years, Dick Shawn appeared on The Tonight Show only when guest hosts were behind the desk. He showed up on episodes hosted by David Brenner and others, but never when Johnny was there. It wasn't until 1985 that Carson finally reconciled with Shawn, inviting him back for 2 appearances that year. By 1986, you could hear Johnny laughing in the background during Shawn's stand-up sets, showing obvious delight in what his guest was doing. But for over a decade, that canoe incident had kept Shawn in Tonight Show purgatory. Number 9. Jay Leno's jokes that didn't land. Before Jay Leno became Johny Carson's successor, before he hosted The Tonight Show for 22 years, he was just another stand-up comedian trying to make it. Leno made his Tonight Show debut in March 1977, and it went well enough that he kept getting invited back. By early 1978, he'd appeared 5 times, but that 5th appearance in February 1978 was different. The jokes just didn't land. The audience's laughter was weak, scattered, polite at best. It was one of those painful comedy moments where you could feel the struggle happening in real time. Johny Carson noticed. He always noticed. After that show, he made a decision. Jay Leno wasn't coming back. Jim McCauley, The Tonight Show's stand-up talent scout, tried to fight for Leno. He saw potential there, believed the comedian deserved another shot. But producer Peter LaSalle shut him down immediately. Johnny just doesn't like him. He doesn't like his jokes, LaSalle said. That's not going to change. Once he doesn't like someone, he doesn't start liking them later. That should have been the end of Jay Leno's Tonight Show career. But somehow, against all odds, Leno eventually worked his way back into Carson's good graces. He returned to the show and became one of its regular guest hosts, and in 1992, when Johny Carson retired, Jay Leno inherited the desk he'd once been banned from approaching. It's one of the great ironies of Tonight Show history. The man Johnny didn't think was funny enough became his replacement. Number 8. Jerry Lewis and the Cue Card. Meltdown. Jerry Lewis was a comedy legend, one of the biggest names in American entertainment. He'd appeared on The Tonight Show over 80 times, building a relationship with the show that spanned decades. Lewis had been in show business since the 1940s, first as part of Martin and Lewis with Dean Martin, then as a solo star in films like The Nutty Professor and The Bellboy. By the 1980s, he was considered royalty in the comedy world. When Lewis guest hosted The Tonight Show, it should have been a victory lap for an icon. But during one of his hosting stints in the early 1980s, something went terribly wrong. Don Schiff was the man in charge of cue cards, one of those invisible crew members who kept the show running smoothly night after night. Lewis made a last-minute request that Schiff simply couldn't fulfill in the time given. It wasn't personal, it wasn't intentional, it was just the reality of live television production. Jerry Lewis exploded. He verbally abused Schiff right there on the set, unleashing a tirade that shocked everyone who witnessed it. This wasn't just frustration or artistic temperament, it was a complete meltdown directed at someone who was just trying to do their job. The crew members who saw it were stunned. These were people who'd worked with some of the biggest stars in Hollywood, who'd seen their share of backstage drama, and even they were taken aback by Lewis's behavior. Word got back to Johny almost immediately. The decision came down fast and absolute. Despite Lewis's massive star power, despite decades of comedy history, despite being one of the most recognizable faces in entertainment, he would never guest host The Tonight Show again. And aside from one brief exception years later, he never did. Johnny's reasoning was crystal clear. Nobody mistreated his crew. The staff who worked those cameras, held those cue cards, adjusted the lighting, and kept the show running were under his protection. They were the backbone of everything he'd built. Cross that line and your Tonight Show days were over, no matter how famous you were. Jerry Lewis could be a legend anywhere else, but not on Johny Carson's stage. Number 7. Steve Allen's fatal mistake. Steve Allen had hosted The Tonight Show before Johny. He was the original, the one who'd created the template that everyone else followed. From 1954 to 1957, Steve Allen had sat behind that desk and invented what a late-night talk show could be. Johny had publicly acknowledged this debt many times over the years, giving Allen credit for paving the way. It was a relationship built on professional respect and mutual admiration for what they'd both accomplished in television. Allen appeared on the show at least 60 times, either as a guest or guest host. The two men seemed to have that special Tonight Show brotherhood, connecting the past to the present, linking one generation of late-night television to the next. Johny understood that without Steve Allen, there might not have been a Johny Carson. Then came October 1982, the last time Steve Allen would guest host. During his appearance, Allen made some jokes about Johny in his monologue. Nothing too vicious, just some gentle ribbing about an old injury Carson had suffered. But there was more to it than that, something deeper brewing beneath the surface. Allen had gotten frustrated with some production changes during the taping, changes that his own associates had actually requested. He took his anger out on a crew member, calling them up the next day and yelling at them over the phone. When word got back to Johny, a crew member came to him directly. They never wanted to work with Steve Allen again. They'd felt disrespected, attacked for doing exactly what Allen's own people had asked them to do. Johny made a decision. Steve Allen was banned from appearing on the show whenever Carson was hosting. Allen only returned years later, but exclusively with guest hosts like Patrick Duffy and Jay Leno at the helm. The message was unmistakable. Respect the people who make this show possible, or you're done. Even legends get cut off. Number 6. Carl Sagan's correction. That cost him everything. Carl Sagan was a recurring guest on The Tonight Show, and Johny had tremendous respect for him. The astronomer had become something of a celebrity himself, thanks in large part to his appearances on the show. Before Carson, scientists rarely appeared on entertainment television unless they were there to be the butt of a joke or to play the boring intellectual. But Johny genuinely enjoyed talking to brilliant minds, and Sagan was one of the most brilliant of his generation. His ability to explain complex scientific concepts in ways ordinary people could understand made him perfect for late-night television. When Sagan talked about the cosmos, about billions and billions of stars, about humanity's place in the universe, viewers at home found themselves caring about astronomy. That was Sagan's gift, and Johny had given him a platform to share it with millions. In 1986, Halley's Comet was making its once-in-a-lifetime passage by Earth, and the whole country was captivated by it. Sagan came on to discuss the comet, and the audience was eager to learn. Everything was going fine until Sagan started correcting Johny, not just once, but twice, on air, in front of millions of viewers. These weren't gentle corrections or subtle clarifications. They were direct challenges to statements Johny had just made about the comet. Now, Sagan wasn't being malicious or trying to show off. He was simply being a scientist, stating facts as he understood them. If something wasn't scientifically accurate, Carl Sagan wasn't going to let it slide, even on national television. But intent doesn't change impact. Johny hid his embarrassment behind his signature affable smile, that Midwestern charm that had made him America's favorite host. But underneath, he felt the sting of being made to look foolish. He'd been corrected like a student who'd gotten the answer wrong, on his own show, by his own guest. Despite his deep respect for Sagan as a scientist and as a person, Johny made a decision. The astrophysicist was not invited back to the talk show that had helped make him famous outside academic circles. Sagan's celebrity had been built, in large part, on those Tonight Show appearances. They'd introduced him to mainstream America, made him a household name beyond the ivory towers of academia. And just like that, the door closed. It was a harsh lesson in Tonight Show etiquette. You could be brilliant, you could be right about the science, you could even be Johnny's friend, but you didn't embarrass the host on his own show. That was the one rule nobody got to break, no matter how correct they were or how pure their intentions. Number 5. William Shatner's three-strike performance. William Shatner was already a household name from Star Trek when he appeared on The Tonight Show. He seemed like a natural fit, charismatic, famous, with plenty of stories to tell from his years in Hollywood and on television. Star Trek had made him an icon to millions of science fiction fans, but Shatner managed to violate 3 unwritten rules of being a Carson guest, all in one appearance. First, he launched into a long, monotonous monologue that went on for 4 minutes straight without letting Johnny interject. 4 minutes might not sound like much, but in the tight, carefully orchestrated world of The Tonight Show, it was an eternity. The whole point of the interview format was the back and forth, the ping-pong between host and guest that created spontaneous comedy and genuine conversation. Shatner turned it into a one-man show. That was strike 1. Strike 2 and 3 came quickly after. Shatner committed the cardinal sin of correcting Carson during the interview, and he did it in a way that made the host look unprepared or uninformed. For a show that relied on the natural rhythm between host and guest, Shatner had essentially hijacked the conversation and made it all about himself. He'd broken the Tonight Show contract, that unspoken agreement that the guest is there to make the host look good, not to grandstand. Johnny smiled through it all, maintaining his composure the way he always did, but William Shatner never appeared on a Carson-hosted episode again. Years later, Shatner told USA Today that he'd had some awful experiences with Carson and didn't understand why the host would get such a strong dislike for certain people. But for anyone who'd watched that appearance, the answer was obvious. Johnny had created a specific dynamic for his show, a carefully calibrated balance of power and comedy that worked because everyone understood their role. Guests who couldn't or wouldn't play along simply weren't invited back. It didn't matter if you were Captain Kirk. On The Tonight Show, Johny Carson was the captain. Number 4. Dana Carvey's sketch that ended everything. Dana Carvey's impression of Johny Carson on Saturday Night Live had been running for years. The sketches, written by Robert Smigel, portrayed Carson in various situations, and while Johnny wasn't thrilled about them, he tolerated them. It came with the territory of being a cultural icon. People were going to parody you, make fun of you, use your image for comedy. Carvey continued to appear on The Tonight Show throughout the 1980s, and Johnny would smile and play along. But in 1990, Saturday Night Live crossed a line. The sketch portrayed Carson as out of touch, unhip, and clueless while chatting with his guest and competitor Arsenio Hall. It wasn't just gentle parody anymore. It painted Johnny as old and irrelevant, struggling to understand a changing late-night landscape. The sketch suggested that Carson's time had passed, that he was yesterday's news, trying desperately to stay relevant in a world that had moved on without him. After that sketch aired, Dana Carvey was permanently banned from The Tonight Show. Days later, during his monologue, Johnny referenced the sketch without naming Saturday Night Live. "I'm getting senile. Both of us. We're old. A couple of old farts is what we are," he said, addressing the jab with his characteristic dry wit. On the surface, it seemed like he was laughing it off, but the decision was already made. Carvey would never sit on that couch again while Johnny was hosting. In May 1991, Jay Leno overheard Johnny in the hallway saying, "If they are going to make fun of me, it's time to go." The SNL sketches had been going on for years, but that final portrayal of Carson as washed up was the breaking point. The mockery had gone from playful to cruel, from affectionate ribbing to genuine disrespect. For someone who'd spent 3 decades at the top of his profession, who'd launched countless careers and maintained his dignity through it all, being painted as a has-been was unforgivable. Number 3. Barbra Streisand's last-minute cancellation. Barbra Streisand's relationship with The Tonight Show had started back in 1962, just 3 days after she'd signed her first recording contract with Columbia Records. She'd appeared 5 times in 1963, and her unique slow rendition of Happy Days Are Here Again had helped launch her into superstardom. On her final visit that year, Johnny had teasingly remarked, "I suppose pretty soon, when you get to be a really big star, we'll never see you again." Streisand shot back, "I'll never come here again." Carson laughed and replied, "She probably means it." For 12 years, those words hung in the air. Streisand became one of the biggest stars in entertainment. Movies, music, Broadway, everything she touched turned to gold. Then, in July 1975, she was scheduled to appear on The Tonight Show to promote her film, Funny Lady. The show had billboarded her appearance for 2 days, building anticipation. The producers had arranged everything: special lighting, orchestra approval, 2 songs she'd perform. It was all set. The day before the show, a call came in. Barbara wasn't coming. No explanation, no apology, just a cancellation. Johny had promoted her appearance, built audience expectations, and now he had a hole in his show. He went out that night and told the audience that Barbara Streisand was supposed to be there, that she hadn't been on the show for 12 years, but it would probably be another 12 years before she was asked back. The next night, Johny got his revenge. He announced Barbara Streisand to the audience, and out walked Madeleine Roux, dressed up like Streisand, lip-syncing to People. For a moment, you couldn't tell if it was really her. Then Johny walked over and said, "Thank you, but we don't need you." The impersonator walked back through the curtain, and the audience roared. Johny had turned his disappointment into comedy, making it clear that on his show, nobody was irreplaceable. Streisand never appeared on The Tonight Show again during Johnny's 30-year tenure. She only returned in 1993, a full year after Carson had retired and Jay Leno had taken over. Whether it was pride, schedule conflicts, or a genuine falling out, that 1975 cancellation had effectively ended her relationship with the king of late night. Number 2. Uri Geller's humiliation. Uri Geller was a self-proclaimed psychic and mentalist who'd built an international career on bending spoons with his mind and performing other supposedly supernatural feats. He'd become a sensation around the world, appearing on television shows in multiple countries, convincing audiences that he possessed genuine psychic powers. People wanted to believe in something beyond the ordinary, and Geller gave them exactly what they craved. Johny Carson, being an amateur magician himself who'd learned sleight of hand as a teenager back in Nebraska, was deeply skeptical of Geller's claims. He didn't just dislike phonies, he actively despised them. For Carson, magic was an art form built on skill, practice, and years of dedication. Charlatans who pretended their tricks were real supernatural powers were insulting both the audience and legitimate performers. They were liars profiting from deception. So when Uri Geller was booked on The Tonight Show, Johny decided it was time to expose him. This wasn't going to be a friendly interview where Geller got to perform his usual act and walk away vindicated. Carson wanted to catch him in the lie, to show America what he believed was nothing more than clever manipulation, masquerading as the paranormal. Before the show, Carson gave very specific instructions to his staff. Nobody was to let Geller or anyone associated with him touch any of the props for his act beforehand, not even for a moment. The items, spoons, keys, various pieces of silverware, had to be completely secure until the cameras started rolling. Geller's performance depended on preparation, on advanced manipulation of the items to make them easier to bend on camera. Johny knew this, and he cut off that possibility entirely. Without being able to prepare, the act fell apart spectacularly. Over 5 segments spanning an agonizing 28 minutes, Geller struggled and failed repeatedly. He touched the objects, he concentrated, he tried everything in his arsenal, and nothing worked. The spoons didn't bend, the keys didn't twist, the supernatural powers failed to materialize. Finally, after nearly half an hour of excruciating television, he managed only to slightly bend a single spoon. "I didn't know at that time that he was an amateur magician," Geller admitted years later. "I also didn't know that he was a total skeptic. But by then, it was too late." Johny had deliberately set Geller up to fail, and it had worked perfectly. The mentalist was humiliated on national television in front of millions of viewers, and he never received another invitation to the show. Interestingly, the exposure actually helped Geller's career in an unexpected way. To his true believers, the fact that he couldn't perform under Carson's conditions only proved his powers were real. If he'd been doing magic tricks, they reasoned, surely he could have done them any time. But Johny had made his point. He'd used his platform not just to entertain, but to call out what he saw as fraud and deception. Number 1. Wayne Newton gets physical. Wayne Newton and Johny Carson had been friendly for years. Newton had made around 30 appearances on The Tonight Show and considered Carson a friend. Both men were giants in the entertainment world. Newton was the Midnight Idol, the #1 headliner on the Las Vegas Strip, earning millions of dollars a year. Carson was NBC's top dog, responsible for a massive share of the network's profits, and he owned a Las Vegas television station while performing stand-up comedy on the Strip. Then, in 1980, both men set their sights on buying the Aladdin Hotel in Las Vegas. The property's owners had been stripped of their gaming licenses due to mob connections, and it was up for sale. Carson and his partner Ed Nigro signed a letter of intent to purchase the property for $103 million. They planned to rename it Johny Carson's Aladdin, turning the casino into a signature property with Carson's name above the door. But the deal fell through. The owners backed out, and Wayne Newton swooped in with a backup offer of $85 million. After facing scrutiny from gaming regulators about his own associations, Newton was eventually granted a license to own the Aladdin. Carson felt double-crossed and humiliated. He was angry about losing the deal, and he was particularly upset about how the media portrayed it, as if he'd somehow lost to Wayne Newton in a business battle. So Johnny started making jokes about Newton on The Tonight Show. Not just gentle ribbing or playful teasing, but pointed humor that questioned Newton's masculinity and manhood. The jokes had an edge to them, a mean spirit that regular viewers noticed. Other comedians joined in, piling on at Carson's implicit invitation. For someone like Newton, whose voice and stature had already made him the target of jokes throughout his career, this was devastating. Newton tried to reach Carson through proper channels. He called, he sent messages through intermediaries. He tried every professional avenue he could think of. Nothing worked. The jokes kept coming. Finally, Newton had had enough. He drove to NBC's Burbank studios, walked down the halls unannounced, and barged straight into Johnny's office. Producer Fred DeCordova was there too, sitting with Carson when Newton walked in. Newton told DeCordova to leave. The producer was so shocked by the interruption, by the intensity in Newton's voice, that he actually got up and left the room. Then Newton laid it out plain. I don't know what friend of yours I've killed. I don't know what child of yours I've hurt. I don't know what food I've taken out of your mouth, but these jokes about me will stop, and they'll stop now, or I will kick your ass. Carson tried to defuse the situation, claiming to be Newton's biggest fan, but Newton wasn't buying it. Don't give me that, he told Carson. I am here to straighten out whatever your problem is, and whichever way you want to straighten it out is fine with me. The implication was clear. Newton was ready to settle this physically if necessary. The jokes stopped after that confrontation, but the damage to Newton's reputation continued for years. In the aftermath, Newton found himself accused of fronting for the mafia, of being connected to organized crime. He blamed Carson's influence for all of it, believing that Johnny's jokes had opened the door to more serious allegations. Newton eventually won a $5.2 million libel suit against NBC, though the award was later overturned on appeal. Years later, on Larry King Live in 2007, Wayne Newton said something he'd never said on television before. Johny Carson was a mean-spirited human being, and there are people that he has hurt that people will never know about. And for some reason, at some point, he decided to turn that kind of negative attention toward me, and I refused to have it. The feud between Carson and Newton revealed something essential about the man behind the desk. Johny Carson could be generous, launching careers and giving unknowns their big break with a simple wave to the couch. But if he felt wronged, if he felt disrespected or betrayed, he could also be ruthless. And unlike most of the other people on this list who simply got banned, Wayne Newton actually stood up to him face to face and made the bullying stop. Johny Carson's 30-year reign over late-night television wasn't built just on charm and quick wit. It was built on standards, on an unspoken code that everyone who appeared on that show was expected to understand and follow. Respect the host, respect the crew, don't lie to the audience, and above all, remember whose show you're on. Break those rules and it didn't matter who you were. Jerry Lewis, Carl Sagan, William Shatner, you were done. That combination of warmth and steel, of generosity and ruthlessness, is what made Johny Carson a legend. He could make careers and he could end them, often with nothing more than a decision to never invite someone back. The banned list, which producer Peter Lasalle confirmed had over 30 names on it, was a testament to Carson's exacting standards and his absolute control over his domain. Some saw it as petty, others as necessary, but everyone understood it was real. If you crossed Johny Carson, you paid the price, and somehow that made those coveted few minutes on his couch even more valuable. Because if Johnny welcomed you, if he laughed at your jokes and invited you to sit at his desk after your set, you knew you'd earned it. You'd played by the rules and passed the test. That's the Tonight Show Johny Carson built, and nobody's quite managed to capture that same mystique since. He was more than just a talk show host. He was an institution, a gatekeeper, the man who decided which careers would soar and which would stall. For 30 years, Johny Carson was late-night television, and everyone else was just visiting his house. If you enjoyed this look back at the king of late night, hit that like button and subscribe for more classic television history. What other Johny Carson moments should we cover? Let us know in the comments below.